Yeah, so it seems like, you know, Uncle Remus is a joke. It's a kind of, not really a joke. It's really a fulfilling of Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 37. And really the entire chapter, that we would become a proverb and a byword among all nations, because we were going off. We were, hearkening unto the other nations, serving their gods. And that's what came to us. Okay. History and actual observation prove that the West African takes himself very seriously, and that the apparent aimlessness of his outlook, his exuberance, and his cheerfulness veil a deep love for his traditional institutions, in whose defense he is capable of dogged and combined systematic efforts which never flag till innovations contrary to his political ideas have been reformed to his liking. He is a democrat to the core, and has shown that he will and can make the will of the people prevail over autocracy. At first sight, this seems to be scarcely compatible with the conditions in which early travelers found the country. It was honeycombed with small and large monarchies, ruled by apparently absolute tyrants. A closer study of these states reveals that the West African king or kinglet is more restricted in the exercise of his functions than the most constitutional monarch in Europe. Before his advent, all government in West Africa was shaped on the family system, based on the extended household consisting of a patriarch and his dependents. Even such a patriarch was, however, strictly controlled by the senior members of the community over which he presided, and traditional law regulated all his political, judicial, economic, and religious activities. Well, then I could tell you what that traditional law was, but for some of those people, I bet you some of it was based off of biblical, even though it was mostly pagan, because we were going off back then. Gradually, such a household would increase so as to become unwieldy. It split into new similar units, which, however, were still held together by the ties of blood and the recognition of a common leader in the person of the patriarch of the group from which they sprang. Under him, they formed a clan, independent from all of the social ties. Even before the advent of Europeans, most of these clans had been welded into states. The formation of West African kingdoms was never due, as it is widely believed, to the subjugation of one people by another. That later their extension might be due to conquest. So we're going to pause right there, but when you go right back up there, right, doesn't that sound quite familiar? A king who was governed, hold on, yeah, I'm going to ignore that. A West African king who was restricted and held accountable by a group of elders. When you read 1 Samuel, who did King Saul have to go talk to? Look, Samuel said unto Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, which Samuel was a judge. The Lord sent me to anoint to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord, which really says Yahweh. For those of you who are new, thus saith Yahweh, Lord of hosts. I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid out wait for him when he came up. I go into my Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. But the point is that the kings in those days were governed by judges and elders. And it's another example. Okay, here you go. In the city-state as existed in Canaan, the elders of the city were identical with the elders of the state. In Israel, both from before during the monarchic period, the elders of the town and those of the people in congregation operated separately. Matters that concerned the entire confederation of the nation were brought to the elders of the people, and after the division of the kingdom to the elders of Israel and Judah respectively, whereas the elders of the town dealt only with the local provisional problems, see above. It is not known how the elders of the country were chosen, but it is possible they were recruited from the city elders. One might argue that the monarchy had deprived the elders of their power, and how the elders of the country, the monarchy had deprived the elders of the power and authority, but this was not the case. Even as powerful as even as powerful king as Ahab had to consult the elders of the land before proclaiming war. Which is, of course, that's true. You know, it's needless to dwell here on the important role that the elders of Israel and Judah played at the time of David. See, we're going to read more. The functions of the elders were: 1, to represent the people in the sacred covenant and the proclamation of the law, to appoint a leader or a king. So what did Saul do? Samuel do, I mean. Samuel was also an elder. He was an elder and a judge. And he was charged with the ability to anoint King Saul. And he also governed him. Told him what moves to make, when to conduct war. Of course, Saul started to go off later in life, but for some time he was working. Okay, to conduct political negotiations and make agreements, to act in times of national crisis, to perform sacred ceremonies. The elders held the meetings near the city gate, and more precisely in the square located next to the gate. But to suffice to say, this right here is proving who we are. Let me make sure I'm okay, right? Suffice to say, this is proven that this is who we are, because we're very similar, because we're the exact same people. We had a group of kings ruled by elders and judges. And we also had, over time, we had, when one king passed, you'd have clans. And you could kind of start to see that at the end of 1 Samuel. Saul had his clan, and David had his clan and his servants, and they began to do war and do battle with one another for the kingdom. All right, so we're gonna continue reading. Kingdoms were founded by foreign adventurers of striking personality, great ability, and unscrupulous ambition, coming generally from the east. Hold on. A successful war in which he took leadership, his wisdom in settling disputes, his claim to magical powers, intrigue, and bribery would gain such a man adherents, with whose help he would impose his domination of the clans which had given him hospitality. Wishing to be found a dynasty of his own blood, he would introduce the patrilineal system of succession, whilst his subjects continued to observe the laws and inheritance in the female line. Which, here we're going to keep reading on. He might even claim immortality. His courtiers would keep his death secret for a time, and when his successor asserted his claim to the throne, it was not as his son, but as the dead king himself recovered from an illness. Some kings were beheaded before burial, and their heads preserved by the successor to advise him. When the successor died, he was buried with his predecessor's head, and has assumed its role with the next king. Other kings had to eat the heart of the predecessor before they were allowed to rule. Which, of course, that's going off. You can see a lot of that in Mayans as well, which, once again proves that we all have a common ancestral origin, because we're all sons of the Most High. We're all Israelites. The Judite man, of course, the Mayans, and all the other 12 tribes. We all come from the same people, even though we all kind of splintered off and started to go off and do our own thing. But as you can see from there, that's based on a lot of Canaanite ideals, which we dwelt among them. Remember we went to the West African, went into West Africa where we were scattered. Of course, we were scattered other places, but mainly focused on West Africa. That's in the nation of Ham. So we kind of took up that kind of Canaanite religion. People began to kind of intermix with them. Of course, you had some outliers, some people who did not intermix with them, but we kind of started to learn and take some of their customs, which, if you've ever seen the movie 300, Xerxes is like this, claiming magical powers and divine power. That's all paganism. All right, so I'm gonna close back and I'm gonna come right back in.